This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Worst ever famine threatens Zimbabwe as economy collapses. Global warming poses great threat to Africa. And snake bites are a neglected health crisis in African countries. Hello and welcome to Africa Live, only on CGTN. I'm Karen Roberts in Nairobi. Penina Kariba joins me now with all your business headlines.
Thank you, Karen. Coming up on Africa Live Business. A shoot disease outbreak cuts cocoa production in Ghana. And uproar as India announces an e-cigarette ban. I'll be back in a bit of details of those stories and plenty more. For now, it's back to you.
Thank you very much, Penina. We begin the bulletin in Zimbabwe, where millions are threatened with starvation as the country suffers a drought. Meanwhile, the UN's World Food Programme is calling for an international appeal to donors for over $330 million to avert the crisis. CGTN's Farai Wakatuya has the story.
We already knew that more than half the country's population would need food aid at some point during this lean season up to the next harvest in March next year. More than 2.2 million of the 7.5 vulnerable Zimbabweans live in the cities where there's been unprecedented levels of food insecurity. However, new information emerging is that the country could run out of maize stocks by January, and that would leave 3 out of every 5 people without enough food to eat. That's according to the United Nations World Food Programme, which is spearheading an international appeal to donors for $331 million. It's also estimated grain imports to bridge the deficit will rise from an initial projection of 700,000 metric tons to at least 1 million. Droughts due to erratic rainfall have ravaged Zimbabwe during the last 2 decades. However, this year's situation has been worsened by an economy that has slipped back into recession. Soaring inflation and a rapidly depreciating local currency mean cash handouts to supplement the food aid won't go very far. Farai Wakatuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Hundreds of Kenyan environmentalists have joined a global protest against climate change, demanding their government take urgent action before it's too late. The protesters have delivered a petition to the country's Ministry of Environment, who promised to take action against the issue. Here's CGTN's Robert Nagila with more.
The young, the old, speaking in one voice, unified by one cause: to demand an end to the age of fossil fuels and climate justice for everyone. This was the scene in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, as hundreds of Kenyans joined protests across the world, demanding action by political leaders to act and stop global temperatures rising before it's too late.
Climate change is real and it's coming for us, and it doesn't matter who you are. Whether you are rich or poor, this thing is real, and it doesn't isolate.
I am here because I love trees and I also love animals.
Whether it's a cyclone in Mozambique or whether it's a drought in the north of Kenya, this is no longer something happening in the future, it's something happening now. So we realise we have a role to work with young people, but also to put in big programs around clean energy and safe water, but governments in the private sector need to lead.
Kenya is among several African countries adversely affected by climate change as a result of increased temperatures, erratic rainfall and drought. A report by the National Drought Management Authority in April warned drought and food scarcity in the country will worsen unless adequate measures are undertaken by the government. The number of people in need of relief assistance doubled from 1.1 million people in February to 2.6 million people by August. At least 13 counties, mostly in northern Kenya, are affected. In response, President Uhuru Kenyatta's government has allocated $18.5 million to mitigate the situation. Last year, Kenya's president pledged to move the country to 100% green energy by 2020. Currently, 70% of the nation's installed electricity capacity comes from renewable energy resources. Back at the protests, environmental activists handed a petition to the government. The permanent secretary in the Ministry of Environment assured the protesters the government will implement policies and mechanisms to fight climate change. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
South Africa also joined the global climate strike, with thousands taking to the streets in 18 cities and towns across the country. CGTN's Julie Shear joined the march in Johannesburg.
Singing struggle songs and braving the sweltering heat, thousands of South Africans took to the streets to march against climate change.
We're marching because we're wanting to stop climate change. We're wanting to save the planet. We're going to do that by reducing our fossil fuels and helping our environment and our companies in South Africa to clean and renewable energy sources.
We're here to raise our voices. We know that climate change is already started and it's killing us. We're here to tell our leaders to take a serious action.
Commitments by world leaders to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees are falling short. The Earth's temperature is already 1.42 degrees warmer than last century, with 2019 expected to be the hottest since the turn of the millennium.
If we cannot stay beneath that, then we are threatening to trigger a whole number of tipping points. We've seen what's happened with the Arctic sea ice. Within 3 to 5 years, there will be none left. That will make the world, a lot hotter place. If the world gets hotter, the methane from underneath the sea and trapped in the Antarctica and the Arctic, 87 times more powerful than CO2.
It's going to affect everybody, rich or poor. Doesn't matter who you are, where you are in the world, it's going to influence you. So it's going to force us to work together. If we don't work together, we won't survive. And if we don't abide by the rules of nature, we also won't survive.
The African continent is so far the hottest, but it's not alone. Young people in 160 countries around the world joined the protests, inspired by Swedish activist and Nobel Prize nominee Greta Thunberg.
Oh, she's crazy inspiring though. Oh, she's actually like one of the reasons I'm here today and doing what we're doing. We started a school project at school, community and everything because of her. And I think most people should look at her and think, that's it, we can do it.
I think it is important that we change the face of teenagers, basically, because grown-ups don't take teenagers seriously. We need to show everyone that teenagers do see what is wrong and they do want to change what is wrong.
Posters reading "There's only one Earth, respect your mother and act now" are all messages to South African leaders and to the world. Marchers are calling for a climate emergency to be declared before it's too late. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Global warming is impacting the world, and although Africa contributes the least to greenhouse emissions, it'll bear the brunt of climate change. The rise in global temperatures is projected to bring severe drought and devastating floods to the continent. CGTN's Asta Tal has more.
Global warming not only greatly hinders Africa's development, but also causes devastation. Cyclones Idai and Kenneth hit Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Madagascar, and Malawi. Mozambique, a country with a long coastline, was among the hardest hit. Port cities were flooded and over 1 million people affected. Factors such as the rise in sea levels and intensified rainfall caused by climate change exacerbated the cyclone's effect. Sea levels have risen 20 centimeters since 1880 and are projected to rise another 30 to 122 centimeters by 2100. For coastal and island nations, rising sea levels pose a tangible threat.
Indeed, this is something that worries us because we see big countries suffering from the effects of climate change, and as small countries, we are very vulnerable. We are vulnerable because the sea levels are rising, and as they rise, they take small countries and territories with them.
Droughts also cause widespread devastation. In Niger, the Lake Chad region, and Senegal, available water in large basins has decreased by 40 to 60%. Sub-Saharan Africa accounts for 7.1% of global greenhouse emissions, While most African countries don't emit much carbon dioxide, there are exceptions. South Africa and Nigeria's dependence and production of coal and oil, respectively, put them among the continent's biggest contributors to greenhouse gases. Zambia follows due to land use-related emissions, but strides are being made. Most African countries signed on to the Paris Agreement. The global agreement had countries pledge to cap greenhouse emissions in an effort to keep the global temperature at 1.5 degrees Celsius. As part of the Paris deal, more developed countries also committed $100 billion by 2025 to help developing nations build their green energy capacity. Countries like Morocco and Gambia have been commended for their commitment to reducing CO2 emissions. Morocco's national energy strategy looks to produce 52% of its electricity from renewables by 2030, while the Gambia has launched a project to restore 10,000 hectares of forest, mangroves, and savannas. Astatal, CGTN.
In Libya, a Sudanese man has been fatally shot after being returned to shore by the Coast Guard. More than 3,000 migrants are reportedly still being held in areas of active conflict. CGTN's Daniela Pearson reports.
After being picked up by the Libyan Coast Guard, a group of 103 migrants are being sent back to detention centres. But, according to the International Organization for Migration, when several of these migrants attempted to run away from their guards, armed men began shooting in the air. One Sudanese man was fatally wounded.
The migrant was struck by a bullet in the stomach, despite immediately receiving medical aid on the spot by an IOM doctor and then being transferred to a nearby clinic. He died 2 hours after admission.
The incident occurred at the Abu Sita disembarkation point, a military facility. But the identity of those shooting remains unconfirmed.
The use of live bullets against unarmed, vulnerable civilians, men, women, and children alike, is unacceptable under any circumstances.
The situation since April has deteriorated severely. Increased fighting means there's a real renewed sense of urgency about getting people out of harm's way, out of danger, and to safety.
UN humanitarian agencies have condemned this incident and are continuing their call for the closure of migrant detention centres in the war-torn country. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
Here in Kenya, women have for the last 8 years been pushing for equal representation in Parliament through the enactment of a law in the Constitution, which states that not more than 2/3 of the members of elective public bodies shall be the same gender. But over the years, the passage of the bill has failed. One of the factors which women say stands in the way of their ascent to leadership positions. CG10's Wilkista Nyabwa reports.
Hundreds of women attended the Commonwealth Women's Affairs Ministers' Conference in Nairobi. The city first hosted the event in 1985, but that was a different time. Few women managed to rise to the top to secure political leadership positions in Kenya's parliament. But things have changed. Currently, out of the 349 seats in parliament, only 76 members are female, representing only a fifth of the total. The House of Senate too misses the mark, with only 21 women owning seats instead of the 23 demanded by law. Kenya's constitution demands that women occupy at least 1/3 of all seats in parliament and 1/3 of all appointed political positions. It has made efforts to boost the number of women in parliament, creating 47 seats for women MPs only and nominating several other women. Kenya's legislature has also made 4 unsuccessful attempts to pass legislation to implement the quota. But each time the House lacked quorum or simply support for the bills.
If you look at other countries that have at least tried to operationalize this, for instance, Rwanda, that has in its constitution that was enacted in the year 2003, they made it a law, not necessarily giving another legislative wing an opportunity to carry out further scrutiny and interrogation.
Rwanda's parliament has the highest percentage of women in parliament worldwide, with 61% of the house comprising women. Tanzania and Burundi have both passed the 30% mark, but several barriers still stand in the way of Kenyan women getting elected.
We have 290 constituencies. I can assure you we had all of them had women vying. Literally, I can almost say. But who won? Only 22. Why? Because of resources. Our elections are very heavily resourced in terms of financial capacity, which most women can have. Two, just the perception that if you go into politics, something is wrong with you, you're too aggressive, you are rude, and some of the women step back because of that.
And it is clear that without support from male politicians, the quota is unlikely to be reached.
I believe the political goodwill, especially from political leaders of political parties, needs to be seen more strongly.
And if you have a lopsided nomination process, then definitely you are sidelining women from participation. And that is why we are saying political parties ought to make a pronouncement that from our standpoint, we are going to make sure regardless that at least 30% of women are exposed to the general election.
It is an issue that continues to elicit debate as the Commonwealth Ministers' Forum draws to an end, the members sharing experiences and success stories as they work to attain the African Union standard of 50-50 representation of women in all leadership positions. Wilkisanyabo, CGTN.
Still in Kenya, the country is gearing up to host the 25th International Conference on Population and Development in November. Global actors will discuss how to accelerate the implementation of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. Well, the high-level Nairobi summit recognizes that universal access to sexual and reproductive health is central to achieving the goals by 2030. It'll also address key issues affecting women, including gender-based violence.
There seems to be a disproportionate amount of violence that is directed at women by men. And this is something we have worked very hard to reduce in the world, and Kenya has done well. But we want to do better. We want to eliminate harmful practices, such as female gender mutilation and other practices that are carried out.
We are going to a short break now. Don't go away, lots more to come, including South African Navy celebrates 25 years of democracy with fleet assessment. And snake bites are a neglected health crisis in African countries.
Suka sace ni gaskiya ni kan ban ji daɗin abin da suka mun ba, sun cuce ni duniya wa lahira, kuma yanzu duk inda nake sunana ba zai taɓa bata ba, a mazaunin Boko Haram ya ɗauke ni.
Ni abun da na bi suma ba aikin su duniya ya yi mun ba, kana ji ba, kawai kai da babu wani abu hannunka. Mutum zai ce baka wani abu zai baka.
I'm never going to be able to exhaust fighting for those people before I leave this earth. And that is a cause that I want to dedicate the rest of my life to.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The South African Navy is celebrating 25 years of democracy with a fleet review in Simonstown. Various vessels have been presented to Vice Admiral Mosiwa Klangwane to inspect at the Navy's headquarters. However, the organization's declining budget is having a crippling effect on the fleet. CGTN's Renida Khan reports.
A fleet review is an ancient naval practice, the gathering of ships for observation by a person in authority. 8 South African naval vessels were presented to the Chief of the Navy and other Navy top brass in a sail past off Simonstown. And several military aircraft also participated in the event.
To be able to present the fleet to our Chief of the Navy, Admiral Hlongwane, is such a significant achievement, taking in consideration the amount of effort and resources it takes to put to sea such a number of platforms in one day is a mammoth task, but we are proud to say to our Chief of the Navy, we had done it.
This is the South African Navy's first fleet review since 2008, when former President Thabo Mbeki was in office. It's part of the Navy's two-day celebrations to mark 25 years of democracy in South Africa. The Chief of the Navy paid tribute to the role it had played in numerous international maritime operations, as well as anti-piracy, peacekeeping and maritime security in Africa. But he said the South African Navy's severe budget cuts meant it was struggling to carry out its constitutional mandate to the country.
I would be remiss if I did not also mention the challenges we face, chief of which is the significant reduction in our defense allocation. This has had and continues to have a deleterious effect on our ability to execute our ordered defense commitment. This in turn has had dire consequences for the number of hours we are able to spend at sea to meet our commitments.
It's a rolling stone. We are at the bottom of the hill, and it's got a possibility to crash the defense force. These budget cuts have got a possibility, or it's got a potential to disable the military of South Africa. It is of great concern to us as military commanders.
But the SA Navy is confident that its fleet remains strong, despite trying economic times. Renad Alcom, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Meanwhile, top officials from the Ministries of Defence of South Africa and Nigeria have met in Johannesburg. The meeting forms part of the Defence Committee agreement between the two countries signed in 2013. The agreement encouraged strong defence relations. The meeting also comes amid strained relations between the two countries. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela has more.
This is a gathering of a high-level delegation from Nigeria, led by the Nigerian Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Defense, Nuratu Batagawara. South Africa and Nigeria enjoy long-standing defense relations with a defense cooperation agreement currently in place. This gathering is a precursor to next month's meeting between Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari and South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, as the two countries mark 20 years since the establishment of a binational commission.
On defense intelligence, the committee noted the action plan developed by the two intelligence services to continue sharing information for the common good of both countries. The committee noted the need for both countries to consider initiating a cross-cultural program between the two fraternal armed forces and peoples of both countries.
This year's meeting is coming at a time when Africa is faced with enormous security challenges, varying from insurgency, terrorism, drug abuse, human trafficking, youth unemployment, bulging youth population, proliferation of small arms and light weapons. The activities of DEFCON are therefore more relevant now than ever before.
This meeting comes at a time when South Africa felt compelled to send special envoys to deliver messages of solidarity to several heads of state and governments across Africa. That move followed recent attacks of foreign nationals here in South Africa.
Relations and engagements between our two countries over the past few days have been cordial and frank, with an action-oriented plan that has been developed by our two delegations. This is testimony that both countries are committed to strengthening the defense-to-defense relations on this platform and to use this opportunity as a key instrument for the advancement of the African agenda.
The two countries pledged to continue to ensure that peace, security, and stability on the African continent continues to be strengthened. The Nigerian delegation has extended an invitation to South Africa for the 6th session of the Defense Committee to be held in Nigeria on a date to still be decided. Yulisa Njamela for CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
A second group of Nigerians fleeing xenophobic violence in South Africa have arrived back home. Over 300 arrived in Lagos late on Wednesday aboard Air Peace. That's a private airline evacuating returnees for free. This latest departure comes just days after the South African government apologised to a number of African nations. CGTN's Deji Badmus has more.
Well, here you have the latest returnees. There are supposed to be over 300 of them. But unlike what happened the last time the first batch came when journalists were allowed to meet them at the tarmac, this time the arrangement is different. They've been brought here and they're making their way now into a hall here where they will be profiled, and after the profiling they will then be allowed to go to their various places. It's a different arrangement altogether. We've actually spoken with some of them, and a lot have some very horrible stories to tell.
It was so difficult. Nothing is going on. If we are trying to get up, no way. Everything is too hard for us for there. That's why we decide to come back home, to stay in our place.
They burned down my business. They burned it all. So there was nothing left. Though I didn't feel it because my life and my kids' own was the most important thing. Yeah, because they were killing as well.
It was horrible. It wasn't so good to me. It wasn't a good experience at all. I've been in South Africa for the past 3-4 years, but it has been horrible, sister. It's like living in hell on earth. My shop was attacked. Yeah. And then the day they came for us on the street, we ran for our dear lives.
But then some of them have said they're very happy that the South African government has apologized, but that despite the apology, they're not very sure they'll be going back to South Africa.
No, I will never go to South Africa anymore.
We will look for business or any job to do, then so that we can take care of the kids.
I have a thriving career before I left here. I have to repackage myself and go back to where I've left out and take it away, take it from there.
If I'm in the shop, they will be looting my house. They'll be packing things in my house. When I get to the house, maybe if I'm sleeping in the house, they'll also be looting my shop. So it's like I'm working for them. When I gather, try to survive. Before you know, all is gone. So it's of no use.
A total of 314 persons, including children, made it back this time, bringing the total number of Nigerians who have been evacuated from South Africa so far to 501.
Just like last week, we ensured we took good care of them, something to eat and drink, some form of money for transportation. Lagos State Governor also joined us here, sent a representative to support the returnees, all of them today. And of course, they have data, airtime that will last 2 months, and they also phones this time around. So Airtel, MTN have been very supportive. And we have a medical team on ground taking their medicals, and if anybody needs medical help, you know, we've taken care of that. We have counselors on ground for those who feel they need somebody to talk to.
It's not yet known if there would be any more evacuations in the coming days following South Africa's government's official apology to Nigeria over the xenophobic violence. But the airline owner who's been flying the returnees back home for free says he's ready to continue until the last Nigerian willing to return home is brought back.
That will be left to the embassy, our mission in Johannesburg, to tell us whether there's still need for more evacuation. So it depends on what they have over there. But the president has said whoever wants to come back, please come back.
Deji Badmus, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
International Criminal Court prosecutors have appealed against the acquittal of former Côte d'Ivoire President Laurent Gbagbo and a youth minister on charges of involvement in deadly post-election violence. Judges acquitted Gbagbo and Blé Goudé in January after ruling that prosecutors failed to satisfy the burden of proof in their presentation of evidence. CGTN's Brian Toussaint reports.
Prosecutor Fatou Bensouda is urging appeals judges to declare a mistrial.
According to some Ivorian civil society lawyers, this appeal decision, although legally correct, offers 3 processing options.
According to Article 83 of the Rome Statute, when the prosecutor makes such an appeal, the appeal chambers to be seized has 3 options. Either it confirms the decision rendered by the judges of the first instance, or it reforms the decision, or it requests the opening of a new trial, this time by the judges otherwise composed. In other words, if the chamber considers that the reason given by Fatou Bensouda are valid, the trial will start again.
With 1 year to go before the presidential elections in Côte d'Ivoire, some believe that this decision to appeal could affect the national reconciliation process.
The liberation of the former Ivorian president was perceived by some as a breath of fresh air for the national reconciliation process. But if the trial still has to take place, there is still a risk of going back to square one. And as it has often been said, this trial at the ICC is taking a one-sided approach.
I was a witness for Bensouda, I was a witness for the court, and I told all my truths. All those who are in Côte d'Ivoire, all those who experienced the crisis agree with me, and so does the whole world. I think the court needs to put an end to the charade. You know, President Laurent Gbagbo to this day has asked us to meet all Ivorians, all other political parties, all civil societies, all NGOs and all religious parties to discuss reconciliation and peace. For the moment, Gbagbo's concern is not the elections. It is that all Ivorians agree amongst themselves to go towards true reconciliation to build this country in peace.
Fatou Bensouda now has until mid-October to make a written statement of her appeal decision. This could revive the trial of the 2 accused for at least 2 years. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
Let's head over now to Morocco's Al Haouz province, a region where unemployment is among the highest in the world. Farmers in the province moved to the city after their harvests were affected by climate change. Well, over the years, young farmers have managed to adopt new farming techniques which have brought remarkable changes. CGTN's Jane Keir with the details.
In the remote mountains of the Al Haouz province in Morocco, farmers are getting their products ready for sale. This has not always been the case though. Global warming has forced many of the farmers here to move to cities in search for jobs. For many years, their till land produced no crops and often remained dry. The situation forced them to come up with farming cooperatives, supported by the International Fund for Agricultural Development and the government of the Kingdom of Morocco.
Before joining this cooperative, I had left the village. I was working in the city. But when the cooperative was being formed, I got a call from my friends, thanks to God. Since 2014, I have been back in my village.
The IFAD-supported project has so far contributed to creating jobs in the Atlas Mountains and reversing the steady flow of migration. The cooperatives also helped the people in Al Haouz province improve their production techniques and has helped strengthen their bargaining power.
If I didn't come here, what would I have done? I would have probably been unemployed. I get very happy when all the products are sold and when the people like our cheese, because I feel like I've put effort into something productive.
The cooperative has also helped in the development of the area, as farmers are no longer migrating into the cities looking for jobs. Jane Keir, CGTN.
The Democratic Republic of Congo's equatorial forest is home to some of the world's most venomous snakes, but the country lacks affordable life-saving medicine to treat snake bites. It's led to the death of many people in rural areas. Well, the World Health Organization says snake bites in African countries are a neglected health crisis. CGTN's Chris Ochemringa has that report from Kinshasa.
A bite from this viper can kill in a matter of hours. The DRC's vast equatorial forest has many of them slithering beneath the undergrowth searching for prey. Gabriel Longangu says he was bitten by a viper in 1959.
I know how venomous a viper is. I got bitten by it about 300 or 400 meters from our home. I ran and told my friends and they all started crying because they thought I was going to die. They took me to my uncle who treated me with traditional medicine.
The World Health Organization estimates that between 81,000 and 138,000 deaths globally are caused by snake bites every year. The global body has described deaths from snake bites in African countries as a neglected health crisis. But Congolese authorities at the University of Kinshasa are trying to resolve the problem.
We don't have enough funds, but we plan to set up an institution for training snake experts. We intend to send them to all the provinces across the country to educate the locals and collect information about dangerous snakes.
People living in remote parts of the DRC are the most affected by snake bites. Congolese researchers have documented 196 snake species in the DRC. Many of the deaths from snake bites in this country are caused by 41 lethal species like cobras and vipers. But this one here is harmless. Francois Nsingi is a technical assistant at the University of Kinshasa's Center for Antivenom.
The entire Congolese population should understand that we get antidotes for treating snake bites from snakes. If we keep killing them, we won't have any treatment.
Research for antivenom studies in the DRC has been hampered by a lack of funding by the government.
The lack of an anti-serum for treating snake bites is a big problem in our country due to underfunding.
But that hasn't deterred people like Francois Nsingi from trying to pass on knowledge about snakes. He breeds them in his compound and has mastered the art of handling them. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Well, let's now go to Panina Karube for all the latest business news. Over to you.
Thank you, Karen. Coming up on Africa Live Business. A shoot disease outbreak cuts cocoa production in Ghana. And uproar as India announces an e-cigarette ban.
In 70 years, China has undergone unprecedented transformation. From its old industrial base in the northeast to its new manufacturing powerhouse in the southeast and to its emerging southwest. CGTN offers you a panoramic view of contemporary China. Our crews will travel along 3 different routes and come to you live from dozens of locations and free mobile studios. Join us for an all-inclusive look at China on our TV channel and digital platforms, September the 9th to the 20th. It is New China, then and now, in celebration of the 70th anniversary of the People's Republic of China, only on CGTN.
I've covered the China story for more than 30 years.
I'm amazed by what they have done here.
And over the years, I've witnessed China change. At times, in leaps and bounds, in very dramatic ways. And sometimes, in a more gradual way. Change may be glacial, but here it seems to be constantly happening. I'm Jaime Flor Cruz. Join me as I revisit and rediscover an ever-changing China.
We begin in Ghana, where cocoa production is expected to fall to 850,000 tons in the 2019-2020 season. The drop in production has been caused by a shoot disease outbreak and adverse weather conditions. Ghana Cocoa Board is yet to announce the official farm gate price for the season. The farm gate price is fixed annually and paid by the government to farmers each season. Ghana's Cocoa Board has replanted 400,000 hectares to counter effects of the shoot disease. It will, however, take at least 5 years to return to full capacity production. Here in Kenya, the Kenya Airline Pilots Association has called off a planned strike against recent plans by Kenya Airways to hire foreign pilots. The pilots had issued a 7-day notice demanding that the airline stops hiring pilots on contract for its Boeing 737 aircrafts. They accused the airline's management of habitual intentional non-compliance with the signed collective bargaining agreements. Kenya Airways outgoing CEO Sebastian Mikosz, however, said that the looming strike was just another strategy for the pilots to negotiate. The CEO argues that hiring contracted pilots was aimed at reducing costs in a bid to maintain the airline's market share. Ethiopian Airlines, meanwhile, has reported an 18% growth in profit. A surge in passenger numbers by 14% helped the airline overcome rising fuel costs and a slowdown in the global economy. Planes were 3/4 full on average, enabling the carrier to fly 12.1 million passengers in the year through June. The airline has developed a new 15-year expansion strategy after achieving its Vision 2025 goals 7 years ahead of time. Part of the plans include the construction of a new airport in Ethiopia and a hotel with a 1,000-bed capacity. It expects to add 25 more planes this year, bringing its fleet to 144 planes. The new aircraft will enable the airline add 11 routes, expanding its destinations to 123 by the new year. South Africa's Fuel Retailers Association will focus on growing jobs and skilling its workforce over the next 10 years. The country is the biggest petroleum consumer on the continent. The sector has remained resilient in tough economic times, but it needs to prepare for the onset of the fourth industrial revolution and a move towards a greener industry. Sujitian Sanchulu Kopula reports.
Fuel is an important driver of the South African economy. The retailing side contributes over 6% to GDP, which is around $14 billion. It's also one of the country's biggest employers.
The fuel retailing industry employs over 80,000 employees. It hosts over 4,500 service stations, which is SMMEs. So it is important in a number of ways because it provides that level of employment. It also provides more opportunities for people to enter the space.
The sector is poised for modest growth, but it's under pressure to evolve like many other industries in the country.
We really need to think and see what we can do to ensure that we are there, we are keeping up with the fourth industrial revolution. So that we can only do it through reskilling of the employees that are in the industry.
I'm getting an opportunity to be a dealer franchisor. So what I would do is buy a franchise from an existing dealer under a certain oil company. And then there's channels where they assist you with training, finance, because there's a lot of barriers to entry.
With a gradual rise in electric vehicles on the road, petrol stations will need to pump money into upgrading infrastructure. A tough ask in a sluggish economy.
We'll probably need more space, a little bit more space on the forecourt, because the charging time of the cars is a lot longer than the filling time for fuel. So that means expansion on the forecourt of more parking bays. It means on the C-store we'll need more seated areas.
The turnover is very massive, but the margins are very small. Crime, obviously, it's a big issue. It's a countrywide, not only for fuel industry, but the entire country we know about crime. Like recently, truck driver strikes or wage negotiations, and then there are strikes, things like that.
The fuel sector has remained resilient despite slow growth, currency weakness and global volatility. It's banking on a petroleum-heavy transport sector and a growing middle class to sustain development over the next couple of years. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Trade talks are back on between China and the US. This latest round, the first in nearly 2 months, kicked off in Washington between deputy trade negotiators on Thursday. The talks are expected to pave the way for higher-level meetings in October, seeking to resolve the 14-month trade war. CGTN White House correspondent Nathan King reports.
China arriving here in the US with a 30-plus delegation led by Yao Min, the Deputy Finance Minister here. 2 days of talks. First day really focusing on agriculture, and we can tell you that even though perhaps no breakthrough, the US has actually offered part of the delegation to stay into next week and travel to a couple of agricultural states, Montana and Nebraska. Perhaps a confidence-building measure, perhaps some sort of agricultural announcement in the works. We don't know yet, but there has been a lifting of tensions, hasn't there? US President Donald Trump delaying some of the tariffs coming in October and December. China resuming some agricultural purchases. Soybean prices have been moving upwards slightly. And the US Trade Representative is set to announce going into Friday the hundreds of Chinese imports will actually be exempted from tariffs for various reasons, but the timing is interesting, isn't it? Christmas tree lights are on the list, bicycles, hover skateboards, all these things that people buy in the busy holiday season will be exempted now from tariffs. So that's another signal from the US that perhaps they have moved from their intransigent stance to a more flexible stance. We'll wait and see. But remember, these are second-tier talks. They are talks about talks. The real talks will begin or resume in October, early October here, if these talks go well. In the meantime, you know, there's a couple of data points saying the world is really suffering. The Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development say investment is starting to go down globally, and GDP growth in both the US and China is being hit. Let's take a listen.
Just this year, then GDP runs the risk of being 1% lower in China, 0.75 percentage point lower in the US, and overall for the world about 0.5%.
One survey conducted as the talks are going on here behind me by the US Chamber of Commerce just around the corner that says about 40% of US firms are really having to factor in the trade war now that's been running for 4 months, and 26% of those are feeling direct effects from the trade war as well. So as business starts to feel it on the chin, US President Trump could feel it in his polls. He faces re-election in November 2020, and the clock is ticking on a trade deal. Nathan King, CGTN, Washington.
The Chinese tech giant Huawei has unveiled new smartphones. The Mate 30 and its Pro version are powered by the Kirin 990 chipsets. The Pro comes with a 5G version that is the world's first second-generation 5G smartphone. The series also features a 4-camera setup and an OLED display. The new phones will run on an open-source version of Android instead of Huawei's homegrown Harmony OS. The Mate 30 series comes without pre-installed Google-licensed apps. Turning to the health sector now, India has banned the production, import and sale of electronic cigarettes. The ban imposed through an executive order includes jail terms of up to 3 years and or fines up to $7,000 for violators. The ban hasn't gone well with users and the trade representatives promoting e-cigarettes. CGTN's Ravinda Bauer reports.
Production, manufacturing, import, export, transport or sale or even distribution and storage and advertisement relating e-cigarettes are all banned.
Citing health risks, the government banned e-cigarettes. This decision has come as a big blow for users like Kanav Kumar. Kumar chose vaping over smoking about 5 years back and says it is a healthier choice for nicotine addicts.
All I know is as a consumer, they've condemned me to a life of death by smoking. I'll be coughing, I'll be smelling bad, I'll face a shitty lifestyle all over again, and that's because the government wants me to have that. They're not letting me live a good, healthy life.
If vapers are disappointed, so are the sellers. Many sellers in Delhi shut shop hours after the announcement, and many like Janita Shrestha are assessing their losses.
It's going to be a big loss for us since we have paid for all the products that we used to have, like from the heavy smokers, with the big devices that we have, pod system that we have, all the e-juices without nicotine, with nicotine.
The trade representatives promoting e-cigarettes have slammed the move, calling it a draconian step.
$150 billion opportunity, that's what is estimated that the nicotine market is going to be. Why are we denying our farmers that? Why are we denying our citizens a right to a less harmful product? These are questions that I would really like to as the government.
The ordinance will be converted into a bill in the next session of the Parliament. Once the Parliament approves the bill, the proposed ban on such products will get a legal backing. Ravinder Bava, CGTN, Delhi.
We'll leave it there for now. Better ahead on global business, a wave of climate change protests grips the world. We discuss the impact in Africa with experts. That's at the top of the hour. I shall see you then. For now, it's back to you, Karen.
Thank you very much, Vanina. Well, we're going to a short break now. We've got all the sports news coming up, including Japan start with a win against Russia as hosts kick